What's up guys, welcome back to Core HTML Mastery. We're going to be talking about CSS and JavaScript. Now these are not technically part of HTML, but they're very often intermingled with the HTML code itself. So it's important that we just have a basic primer on what CSS and JavaScript are and how to implement them at a really basic level inside our web page. Now we've already made use of CSS in this course. We probably already have a basic understanding of how CSS is included. So we're going to start with that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll simply have a paragraph with some very basic text. Let's just refresh our page and we can see our paragraph with the text, some very basic text. Now inside our head tag, and by the way, you may sometimes see me make use of style tags down at the bottom of the document. And the reason why I do this is because many JavaScript frameworks follow this convention where we have the style tags at the bottom of the document. But if you ask a purist, or perhaps you're in a web developer interview, then technically style tags should be included inside the head section of the HTML document. It just so happens that style tags will work wherever we place them, but technically they should be included in the head of the document. Now, a quick example of how CSS works. We have a selector. So we're going to select all paragraph elements. And inside these curly brackets, we're going to have our CSS rule. And a CSS rule comprises of a property and a value. So the property we want to target is color, and we're going to set the value to red. If I save and refresh the page, notice the paragraph turned red. Now this is perfectly valid syntax. We can include all of our CSS styling inside style tags, but as you can imagine, our HTML document might become quite long in this case, because we might have a whole range of different CSS styles that we're using, and only after that are we actually starting the body of a HTML document. So if we also have a long HTML page as well after our long CSS styling section, we're going to have a very long document. It's going to be a bit harder to read and to manage. So taking a look at our directory over on the left-hand side, it's fairly common to have a folder called something like styles, or you might call it CSS. And inside that folder, we're going to have a document where we keep all of our CSS. So let's create a new file inside the styles folder, and we'll simply call it styles.css. And we'll copy our CSS rule over into that CSS document, and we'll then get rid of our style tags. So now we simply need to tell our HTML document where to find that style sheet. That's now referred to as an external style sheet because the CSS code is not inside the HTML document itself. And we make use of another link element. Rel attribute equals style sheet, and we then have the href. So notice it's exactly the same as the link element used to pull in that favicon in the previous part of this course. And we also have a href attribute. And just to recap, it's inside the styles folder. And the name of the file is styles.css. And just as proof of concept, because our text is already red, we're actually going to set the color of the text to blue inside this external style sheet. So let's save a HTML document. We'll just remember to close our link tag. Notice that these are self-closing, so I simply mean to add the trailing angled bracket, but we don't actually need to close it like this. This is actually invalid HTML. This is an example of one of those standalone tags, which is self-closing. So let's save that. Let's refresh the page. You can now see the text in the paragraph turns to blue. And that's because we are pulling in this external style sheet. And of course, we can add additional properties and values. So for example, we could do something like font size, 50 pixels, refresh the page. We now have some really large blue text. So now let's think about JavaScript. What is JavaScript? Well, in this context, it's a scripting language that operates inside the browser. And it allows us to give our HTML pages some advanced functionality. So HTML is very good for styling static pages, but if we want our page to be functional, for example, we might want to click a button and change the color of our text. Or we might want a box to appear in response to a mouse movement, for example. For that type of dynamic functionality, we need to make use of JavaScript. And it's really easy to include JavaScript in a HTML document just by making use of script tags. So in the same way that we can include CSS inside style tags, we can include JavaScript inside script tags. Now, since we don't know JavaScript, or assuming we don't know JavaScript for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to code something that's very basic. Let's just have a simple HTML button. I'll just call it a simple button. Let's refresh the page. And inside our script tags, we're going to define a JavaScript function, and it's going to be called showAlert. And we're going to specify what that function does. And it's going to call alert, which is a JavaScript function which creates a pop-up box on the page. And we can specify the text of that pop-up box. So we can say this is a JavaScript alert. And JavaScript, we can end it with a semicolon, although this is actually optional in JavaScript. Now that won't do anything just yet if we refresh the page, because although we've written a JavaScript function, that function is not being called. It's just inactive. It's available, but it's inactive. On our button, we can include an attribute that listens for a click event. In fact, it's very simple in HTML. OnClick. The OnClick attribute tells the page what to do if that element is clicked on. What do we want to do? We want to call that showAlert function. OnClick equals showAlert. What does showAlert do? It pops up an alert box that says, this is a JavaScript alert. Okay, let's refresh our page. Let's test the functionality. So we click on the button and it should call showAlert JavaScript function. Click. There we go. We get a pop-up box and it says, this is a JavaScript alert. Okay, let's try one more thing using JavaScript. The first thing we'll do is set an ID attribute on our paragraph. We'll simply give it an ID of paragraph. We're going to delete the old definition of our JavaScript function, and we're going to make use of a different JavaScript method or function, and it's document getElementById. So this is going to select the element with a certain ID. We're going to search for the element with the ID of paragraph. We're then going to call .style.color equals red. Now, I appreciate you might not know how JavaScript works at this stage, but take a moment and think. Maybe you can still figure out what this JavaScript is going to do when we click the button. Well, let's try it out. Let's refresh the page. Let's click our button, and you can see our text, which was previously blue, now turns to red. If we refresh the page, it turns back to blue again. So in this case, we're actually controlling the CSS styling using JavaScript. Now, this is really just an introduction. There are so many things that can be done with JavaScript. We're not going to get into that right now. Key concept is just to have a basic idea of what JavaScript is and what it's used for, and how to incorporate it into a HTML document. Now, notice at the moment, we have our JavaScript mixed in with our HTML document. And again, although this is valid syntax, it's common practice. In the same way that we extracted our CSS styling to an external document, it's fairly common to also extract our JavaScript to an external document. So let's head back to our directory structure. Let's create a new folder and we'll call it scripts. Or sometimes you might see this called something like JS for JavaScript. So let's call the folder JS. We'll create a new file and we'll just call it utilities.js. This is a fairly common setup. And we are going to grab the JavaScript. Notice we don't need the script tags. The script tags just tell the HTML that everything in the middle is not HTML and belongs to a scripting language like JavaScript. But once we have a file with the extension .js, well, this is no longer a HTML file. We don't need those script tags anymore. We can just paste in our JavaScript, or that's the CSS we've got. So let's get the JavaScript. And the next thing we want to do is simply import that JavaScript. So we're still going to make use of a script tag for this. In fact, we still need both the opening and closing script tag. but we're not going to include the JavaScript on the page itself. We can simply add a source attribute to the script element. So we're going to say source equals, and specify that it's inside the JS folder, and we're looking for utilities.js. So we'll save, we'll refresh the page. Now when we click our button, we can see the JavaScript still works. So that now brings us to the end of this course on mastering the basics of HTML. Logical next steps might be to check out one of my courses on CSS or JavaScript. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope to catch you in another course.